I'm Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, while Ukraine hits yet another pipeline and oil plant with fuel shortage in Russia approaching 20%, more than half of Ukraine's natural gas production capacity has been destroyed by Russian strikes. We also discussed the state of US-Russia relations and what will happen to the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty when it expires. Finally, Dom speaks with Benjamin Tallis about the use of AI in defense.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday, the 9th of October, 3 years and 229 days since the full-scale invasion began. Today, I'm joined by Associate Defence Editor Dom Nicholls.
Thanks, Adélie. Hello, everyone. Let's start inside Ukraine and a Russian drone attack on the port of Chornomorsk down in Odessa Oblast. Injured a thankfully small number of people, caused damage to port infrastructure last night. Now, initial report says 7 Shahed 136 type drones had approached from the Black Sea. Unconfirmed reports suggested that the port facilities, storage areas and critical infrastructure had been damaged. These reports are updated. Still imagery later on showed 3 large fires within the port limits and likely indicated the presence of at least one container vessel alongside at the time. Video footage also captured the sound of drones approaching the port, accompanied by anti-aircraft fire. In total now, we think 21 impacts were recorded during the attack there, leaving 5 people injured. This report comes from Ombre Intelligence, the global maritime risk management firm. According to the mayor of Chornomorsk, the city suffered a power outage, and we think the critical infrastructure is still running on emergency generators as of now. So the attacks there and across the country as a whole killed 5, injured 19 yesterday. According to Ukraine's Air Force, Russian forces launched 112 Shahed-type attack and decoy drones last night. Air defences intercepted most, as they have been doing for months now, but 22 drones still got through, hitting 12 locations. Governor Alexander Prokudin said 10 houses were damaged in Kherson Oblast, killing 2 people there. Another 2 were killed in Sumy when 50 attacks occurred across the region, local authorities said. Now, you might see reports this morning about a strike on a passenger train in the Chernihiv region. That has been discounted now, but you might see a bit of stray voltage around the edges. Ukraine's rail company, Ukrzaliznytsia, said, quote, widespread information about a passenger train being hit in Chernihiv region is not true. So earlier in the day, the mayor of Atop had said that a train with people had been hit 14 kilometres away in Halamanovo station. However, the mayor has now updated his words. Artem Semenikin said, I didn't write the train itself was hit. The hit fell on the locomotive next to the passenger train. Anyway, as of now, there are no reports of casualties, and we don't think that a passenger train was hit. OK, now next to no movement on the front, but in the Donbass, we think elements of Russia's 41st Combined Arms Army appear to have been moved away from Pokrovsk, about 30 km southwest to that area where Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts all meet. That's where Russia seems to have been having, the most success in recent months, most being a relative term. It is very, very minor, the movements there, but that seems to be where they are concentrating. I would just say, when we use terms like motor rifle brigades, tank divisions, etc., I mean, they are now just words on a sheet of paper. They do not reflect at all what the unit consists of in reality. So there's not a huge tank division about to go storming over the border, etc. We think they are still sticking with these actions of small groups, fewer than 5 people at a time, just rushing Ukrainian lines, often on motorbikes, trying to get through and then group together. Now, the last one on the military side in Ukraine, I've just pointed to a tweet from the Ministry of Defence in Kyiv. It came out a couple of days ago. I'm not sure when the footage was taken, but it showed remarkable footage showing a drone that is said to have a self-destruct system that landed on a Russian load vehicle for a Buk air defence system as it was travelling on a road. So it's going along at a fair old clip. This drone lands on it, travels for about 15 kilometres, we're told. It then is spotted by Russian service personnel. They take photos of it, and one guy jumps up and pokes it with a stick, always wise. And then the device exploded, we are told. Now, we don't have any footage of the actual explosion. There was not another drone nearby to film that. So, this is all coming from the Ministry of Defence in Kyiv. So there's obviously got to be a slight health warning with that. But it is rather remarkable footage on social media. I think we might be running it on our website now, but do go and have a look. I tweeted something out about it a little while ago. That was quite interesting, that the fact that it can still be under control by the pilot 15 odd kilometres later, so almost certainly not a fibre optic view drone. It managed to literally land on this vehicle and still be under control such that it's able to move the camera around and detonate, we are told. Now then, into Russia, and last night Ukrainian drones hit a gas pipeline and an oil plant 300 kilometres east of Ukraine in the area of Kotovo, that's in Volgograd region. Ukraine's general staff said strikes on the Korobyovsky gas processing plant and the Yefimovka linear production dispatch station. No, I wouldn't know what it was either if I tripped over it. But anyway, that blew up. Explosions and fires at la Zubala-Platz. Now, the Korobyovsky facility is said to be one of the largest plants for the primary processing of natural gas and associated petroleum gas in southern Russia. There were also other drone strikes reported today in the Matvey-Kurgan region, that's in Rostov Oblast, so just to the east, southeast of Ukraine, very close to Ukraine. Also in that same area, we think a fuel and lubricants train was hit this morning. Now, not known if the incidents are connected, but it seems too much of a coincidence for two strikes in the same area overnight not to have been the same wave. Putin has finally acknowledged this campaign against the Russian oil refineries, but he said it's not going to help Ukraine. Even so, a Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger has been expressing concern about Ukraine's strike campaign. The Institute for the Study of War said that this mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are specifically targeting the electrical desalting units with atmospheric vacuum tubes. Again, I could trip over one of these things, I wouldn't have a clue. Within the oil refineries, which we think, or he says, is the heart of the refineries. It plays a key role in processing and separating crude oil. I mention it because it's interesting that this campaign has been picked up in the Russian mill blogger sphere. Then for his part, in an address on Twitter last night, President Zelensky said, according to our data, the fuel shortage in Russia, specifically gasoline, is already approaching 20%. They've now begun tapping into diesel reserves, which they've been saving for a rainy day. He was also speaking yesterday at one point to a group of journalists, and he said Russian citizens will experience blackouts if Moscow attempts to inflict them on Ukraine. We told them they must understand. If they want to black out us, we will do the same. Russia must feel the price of this war, but we are not killing civilians. So that's the kind of latest on the Ukrainian long-range attacks against Russian oil and associated infrastructure. It's worth pointing you to a report in Bloomberg. They're reporting today that Russian strikes have destroyed more than half of Ukraine's natural gas production capacity ahead of this winter. State-owned energy company Naftogaz says that Russian forces launched one of their largest barrages yet last Friday, which we've reported on, firing 35 missiles and 60 drones at gas facilities in the Kharkiv and Poltava Oblast. Naftogaz called that attack the most massive assault on gas infrastructure since the war began. And Bloomberg sources said that the strikes destroyed around 60% of Ukraine's gas production. Big numbers. Ukraine's largest private energy firm, DTEK, said that it was forced to halt operations at its Poltava facilities following those strikes. And then 2 days later, overnight Saturday, Sunday, you'll remember Russia launched another attack targeting infrastructure critical for residential heating, causing further destruction. Another statement from Naftogaz pointed that out. So according to Bloomberg, Kyiv has appealed to its G7 partners for urgent equipment to repair damaged facilities and reiterated its requests for additional air defence systems to protect critical infrastructure. Tuesday of this week, Ukraine's Energy Minister Svetlana Hryntchuk said that Kyiv plans to increase natural gas imports by 30% to compensate for the losses. Now, if attacks continue, Kyiv expects to import about 4.4 billion cubic metres of gas, worth roughly €2 billion, 2.3 billion US dollars by the end of March, Bloomberg sources said. Some of the additional reporting there is by the Kyiv Independent, but I posit that because it is a serious situation. As much as we report the situation in Russia, there is a very serious situation happening as well in this regard inside Ukraine. A couple more for me. I'd like to point you to a survey conducted online in the United States earlier this month, October the 1st to the 2nd, among a fairly small number, 2,413 registered voters. The survey was done by the Harris Poll and Harris X. They asked a number of things. We'll put the link in the episode notes. So there's a lot in there of domestic US politics that you may find particularly interesting. I'll pull out a few things. In terms of favourability of political figures right now, or October the 1st to 2nd, the top three were Charlie Kirk, 16%, his wife, a widow, Erica Kirk, 14%, and Volodymyr Zelensky on 13%. Donald Trump was on minus 4% for completion there. But then when asked, do you think Trump will solve the Ukraine war or not, selecting not solve was 63%, up from 59% in August. And just a breakdown of the not solves, 82% Democrat, 37% Republican. Worth pointing out, though, that on the similar question, do you think Trump will solve the Israel-Hamas war or not, the not solve figure was 64, no change from August. 84% not solve, Democrat, 39% Republican. Obviously, with the news today about a possible breakthrough in Israel-Hamas, these figures need to be taken into context. Asked, do you support or oppose Donald Trump's efforts to end the war in Ukraine? Support held steady, 65%, down very slightly, 66% in August. And then, do you support or oppose additional economic sanctions on Russia to try to force it to end the war? The support was pretty widespread, 77%, 71 Democrat, 86 Republican. Interesting, 86% Republican. And finally, do you think the United States should continue to provide weaponry and impose sanctions? Yes, was there at 68%, very, very much equal Democrat and Republican. We'll put a link, as I say, in the episode notes, worth having a look. And hat tip to Michael Weiss of The Insider for pointing me towards that. Now, the last one for me, some rum news from the Baltic Sea, and not in a good way. Charges against the master and two other crew members of the Russia-linked Eagle S vessel, which was accused of damaging an underwater electricity cable in late 2024, were dismissed by the Helsinki District Court last week. So Lloyd's List, where I've been reading this, citing legal sources, says that the Eagle S decision shows malign actors will be able to enjoy effective impunity were they to use ships deliberately to wreck crucial submarine infrastructure. This decision comes as Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, has accused Russia of targeted grey zone campaigning. So the three Russian national officers from the now sanctioned tanker Eagle S stood trial in Helsinki on charges of aggravated criminal mischief and aggravated interference with communications after the vessel's anchor severed the Estlink 2 cable between Finland and Estonia late last year. It was dragging its anchor for about 90 kilometres, we think. It severed the cable, disrupted power supplies to Estonia for about 6 months and necessitated repairs at a cost of tens of millions of euros. However, Helsinki District Court last week threw out the charges for a range of reasons, crucially including Finland's lack of jurisdiction over an incident involving a ship registered in the Cook Islands. Now, obviously, the Shadow Fleet seemed to change their flags a lot, but at the time of the alleged activity, the Eagle S was registered in the Cook Islands. The prosecution did not argue that Eagle S's conduct was willful, but instead contended the crew were aware of the poor state of repair of the anchor's windlass, that's the bit that shoves the anchor up and down, stick with me at the back, and neglected their duties. The men had all pleaded not guilty. Mike Phillips, who's the disputes partner at Watson, Farley and Williams, an international energy, infrastructure and transport law firm, said that this was not an aberration, but simply the logical application of the stipulations of the UN, or UNCLOS, UN Conventions on the Law of the Sea, where that is applied to domestic law. And he says that means the findings would likely be similar in other jurisdictions too. Bit nitty-gritty, but he said because the incident occurred not in Finland's 12 nautical mile territorial waters, but rather within its 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, he said as a matter of law, what the Finnish court has said is that where these incidents happen in an EEZ, the law of the coastal nation does not trigger. there is no jurisdiction unless the damage happens within territorial waters. And basically, this whole thing is within the purview of the country where the ship is registered, i.e. the Cook Islands. Now, Lloyd's List say that because the Cook Islands have taken no action against the Eagle S, despite the obvious damage, the global system of shipping law is unable to respond to this event and arguably others like it. So all a bit wobbly at sea, Adélie. But that's us up to date.
Thank you, Dom. And now to the diplomatic updates. Speaking to reporters and the State Duma yesterday, the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that the strong momentum for ending the Russia-Ukraine war built upon the August meeting between the US President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska had faded. That is bringing increasing pessimism about peace talks following Putin's effective dismissal of direct negotiations with Zelensky, which is an initiative that Trump had personally backed. Ryabkov gave also a gentle reminder, a nudge, shall we say, to Washington that it had yet to respond to Putin's proposal to extend the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START, which scheduled expiration is in 2026. Ryabkov called that an outstretched hand to the United States, adding that if the American refused, they would manage without it. Now, what is the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty? It is a series of treaties, initially between the US and the then Soviet Union, to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. The first one was signed in 1991, and the second one, nicknamed New START, in 2010 by Obama and Medvedev. Now, the first START treaty, incidentally, is one of the preliminary treaties of the Budapest Memorandum. It's part of that whole package of negotiations whereby Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, and that we so often talk about in this podcast. Russia suspended its participation in the New START treaty, which again was signed in 2010, in February 2023, a year into the full-scale invasion. It's worth noting that a key feature of that treaty is on-site inspections to verify compliance. And that was suspended in 2020 due to COVID, and it never resumed. I mean, we all know why. This New START treaty was set to expire in 2021 and has been extended for 5 years, hence the 2026 deadline. So it's a major thing when it comes to the framework, the nuclear framework, and the arms de-escalation. Russia also warned they would retaliate if any country, particularly the United States, resumed nuclear testing. Ryabkov accused Washington, during his answers, of maintaining nuclear test infrastructure in a state of readiness and signaled that Moscow is closely monitoring US actions. It echoes Putin's comments last week, speaking to reporters at the Valdai International Discussion Club. He was asked by reporters whether it was a good time for Russia to resume nuclear testing. To which Putin responded that preparations are underway elsewhere. What does he mean by that? It's very vague. Maybe the United States, maybe elsewhere. If tests are conducted by others, he continued, we will respond in kind. Which is, again, a significant escalation in terms of rhetoric, which raises concerns about the erosion of the arms control framework and general politics of de-escalation. Now, if the US-Russia relations continue to be subdued, to use Dmitry Peskov's phrase, the relationship between Ukraine and the US continues to improve since the UN General Assembly a couple of weeks ago, and in the context of the delivery of the Tomahawk missiles that we have extensively covered in the podcast. President Zelensky said today that Ukraine was ready to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he were to secure a ceasefire with Russia. I see you raising your eyebrows, Dom.
Well, yeah, I'm all for it if it works.
Now, we all know how much Trump covets the Nobel Peace Prize, and the hand that Zelensky is playing here in order to keep the momentum going is very clear. It is anything that will help Ukraine remain in Trump's good graces, especially on the back of the Gaza peace deal that is being negotiated right now. Meanwhile, also on the Ukrainian-US relations, the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Yulia Sviridenko, is set to travel to the US next week, alongside Zelensky's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak, and Sections Commissioner Vladislav Vlasyuk. The talks will address air defenses and energy, peace talks, sanctions against Moscow, and frozen Russian assets. Moving on to Ukrainian politics, more specifically, an interesting story on the ongoing debate about whether Ukraine should hold elections despite the war. As we all know, it's both legally and technically impossible due to martial law at the moment, and even Zelensky's opponents reject the idea of holding a vote in wartime. But that doesn't prevent the rumour mill, as well as political manoeuvring behind the scene. The latest report is from Intelligence Online, which said that several high-level politicians and military officials in Ukraine had been offered a spot on Zelensky's parliamentary list were he to run for president. Valery Zelensky, who's the former commander of the armed forces and now Ukraine's London ambassador, has long been rumoured to be a prime contender for the presidency, should elections be organised. He's been a consistent favourite of the European population. In July, a poll found that he was trusted by 73% of Ukrainian voters. He's always remained very tight-lipped about his political ambitions, and he's been careful not to give away any sign of presidential ambition. In fact, The Guardian reported in July that he'd even dismissed an offer from former Trump advisor Paul Manafort when he contacted Zelensky and pitched his services as a political consultant in a potential future electoral campaign. Now, to go back to today's report about a parliamentary list, the ambassador was quick to dismiss the rumours in a tweet, saying that anyone who receives an offer from someone with my name to join any processes through any organisation must report it to law enforcement agencies. I do not create any headquarters or parties, and in principle have no ties to any political force. My position isn't changed. While the war continues, elections to Ukraine's state bodies are impossible.
At the Prague Defence Summit run by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, I chatted to Ben Tallis, Head of Thought Leadership at Helsing, a defence AI company. Among other technology, Helsing builds strike drones and have used their AI system to fly a Saab Gripen fighter jet over the Baltic Sea. They also produce sea drones and underwater gliders capable of staying submerged for months at a time. I asked a few questions about military technology, AI and the near future for defence innovation, and then tried to hang on to Ben's ankles when he gave me the answers. Here is our conversation. So I'm here with Ben Tallis, Head of Thought Leadership at Helsing. Before I get mired into the difference between AI and future tech and new tech and all the rest of it, what does Helsing do?
So Helsing's Europe's largest defence AI company. It was founded in 2021 to use AI to protect democracies. So it's a very value-driven company, and now we've developed from building just software and the artificial intelligence itself to some expressions of that, which include strike drones, which are being tested in Ukraine. It's our AI agent, which is called Centaur, that actually flew a real Saab Gripen over the Baltic Sea.
What's RAI?
Our Helsing's AI. It was Helsing's AI. That's all right.
I thought it was some new acronym that I didn't know.
Catch up, Dom. Our AI is the new thing. We're all over it.
Oh God, I'm going to struggle through this interview.
Don't worry, the AI is here to help. It was our AI, which is called Centaur, that actually flew a real Saab Gripen fighter jet over the Baltic Sea. Not only controlled the direction of the plane, but supplied instructions as to when to fire weapons, when to fire missiles. And that's based on this AI agent testing that we've done in a simulated environment where it actually mimics the actions of a pilot. And we've flown it against real pilots in the simulator. Then we took that into real life, so into the metal. And now we can do that in 2 versus 2 combat as well, beyond visual range. So AI teaming against human pilots. And we work in the sea domain as well for strike drones at sea, but also underwater gliders that do anti-submarine warfare, so sensing in the oceans. Small 2-meter gliders that would go under the water for 3 months at a time, which have what's called edge computing, which means the AI is on the platform and sends back only the data that's needed. This is a way of making networks more efficient. It's a way of exploring new possibilities in military technology. We're really happy to be doing that from Europe as a European sovereign capability.
Now, we've heard a lot at the Prague Defence Summit here about how technology is advancing at the pace of relevance and all these buzzwords. I mean, I filled out my bingo card a couple of times, but it's easy to get swamped by this. Where are we with AI at the moment in the world, particularly through the lens of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, we've been filling out our bingo card too over the last couple of days because there has been a lot of talk about the new tech and the promises it holds out. But one thing we're very clear about at Helsing is that technology alone doesn't bring the kind of military change that is being talked about. that is brought by warfighters. It's brought by soldiers having the technology in their hands, being able to experiment with it, play with it, and work out how to use it in order to actually deliver military advantage. And that comes through exercising, through experimenting, working out how to actually integrate it into doctrine, into operational concepts. In a way, that's where we're seeing the limits of a technology-only approach in Ukraine, for example, because there's a lot of new technologies, particularly uncrewed systems, drones, and so on, being used in Ukraine.
Right, so I'm going to have to stop you repeatedly through this chat because I'm hanging on to your ankles as it is. So when you say a technology-only approach, you mean buying snazzy kit, bunging it out the door and seeing what happens?
Yes,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we haven't seen is that deliver for Ukraine the ability to break through the attritional struggle that's there. We've actually seen technologies being used on both sides contributing to a World War I type fight with World War III type tech. So that, we think, is because we haven't worked out how to best make use of this technology by incorporating it. And so historically you can point to good examples of this. The tank first debuts in 1916, but only by 1918 do you actually start to see the tank used as part of combined arms maneuver warfare with rudimentary close air support and the idea that it's there to deliver mobility and deliver maneuver. It takes another 20 years before the German army, in that case, deliver its full potential through blitzkrieg. So what we're seeing is technologies thrown in, not necessarily being used in a coherent way or in a way that can break through that stalemate. And we need to work together with militaries to deliver that advantage over time.
So the advances we've seen, so we've seen it go from the hobbyist, if you like, cheap and cheerful with a camera attached and then maybe a weapon attached, and now we're into first-person view drones and fibre optic drones and greater capacity, being able to deliver munition and do other bits and pieces. So that's a fairly linear route through advancing technology, but you're saying that at the same time there's not been a comparable development of the doctrine and how it should be used alongside other military capabilities. The doctrine is not following with it, the military thought is not following with it. Is that fair?
I think so. That's a fair summary of where we're at, but it's also perhaps important to highlight that drones have been used largely to swap out existing kit at the moment, so used as a substitute for artillery, used as a substitute for mortars or so on in some cases. And sensor drones have been used to just provide a better situational picture, which has led to what some call a more transparent battlefield. So the hider-finder competition has changed, and it's very much in favour of the finders at the moment. But as you rightly say, we haven't managed to concentrate that new technology in ways that would then break through the stalemate. Where that might start to change is with things that are not just used as substitutes, but the kind of AI-powered, software-driven drones that we and others make and which are being tested in Ukraine, because they potentially provide a different kind of capability, but again, it has to be worked out how to properly use them. And that's something that NATO militaries are really looking very closely at Ukraine to see what lessons they can learn there. But increasingly, they're also starting to think about their own force structures and how to integrate this tech.
Right, I've got to stop you again there. Second hurdle that I've just crashed into. So you say that above and beyond the linear, if you like, development of technology, you say AI is going to just accelerate that. So what is it about AI? How are you defining AI for starters, and what is it about that application that means that this area is going to accelerate?
So one clear example would be when we are actually able to deliver real swarming, autonomous swarming, so drone swarms that can relate to each other, sense each other's presence of the individual drones, and then act coherently to deliver a powerful mass precision strike, for example, to overwhelm a particular target. That requires delegation of autonomy to these assets, and that's something we have to think about very carefully as democracies, from a legal point of view, from an ethical point of view. But if we see a struggle like Ukraine's, which your listeners need no introduction to the fact this is a highly ethical struggle of a democracy against a dictatorship, then we have to think how we best empower our forces and give ourselves the arsenal that democracies actually need to win. So I would say that working out where autonomy and artificial intelligence can bring that edge is a key part of the game now. And that's not only for drones, it's in the air domain, it is in the undersea sensing domain, it's across different battle domains.
In what way? Talk to me about the ethics. Where is the ethical concern about AI?
Well, some people worry a lot about delegating lethal authority, the ability to kill other human beings, to machines. But actually this is a little bit of a false debate, because this is something we've been doing in military affairs for an awful long time. When you fire an artillery shell, you've delegated the authority to that shell. You're not going to get it back. It's not going to stop at any point. It is going to land regardless of who or what is in its way. Any beyond visual range air combat using a missile where you can't see the target where it goes, a smart missile that would guide onto a target using infrared or heat seeking, that implies the same thing. But now, because of the ability to delegate more autonomy, people are really thinking about things they might call killer robots or so on. But again, this is something of a false debate. We treat this technology very much like any other military technology that needs to be tested. You have to train the people who are going to use it in order that you can trust it. And so train, test and trust is our mantra on that. And we're at the forefront of developing what we call assurance, to make sure that artificial intelligence is traceable. You understand why the machines have made decisions as they do, controllable and predictable. And we don't only see this as an ethical question, but one of the effectiveness of our technology. Because if we can do that, we can make sure it only does what it's supposed to do and nothing more, but that it really does that task.
I might be being a bit Winnie the Pooh here, bear with a small brain, but I don't see why this is such a big problem, because we have an ethical framework about the application of military power and lethal force. I don't see why this is any different from that. And if you're firing beyond visual range at a signal, at a data point, I don't see why that is different. And we've embedded that through our military culture today. Why that is different. If AI enables the device to better discriminate between friend and foe, between a civilian car and a BMP-2, that can only be a good thing. I don't see why there is increased concern on the ethical front here.
Well, Dom, I'm with you, because this proliferation of sensors that give you more data to be able to actually make the kind of accurate decisions you're talking about, and the increase in the precision of these weapons does indeed mean they're more discriminating, potentially, and run less risk of causing accidental harm. But nonetheless, it is something we really take very, very seriously to make sure that's the case, and that's where we see our role in this. In the future, where perhaps targeting decisions would be delegated to intelligent machines, so for example in the case of an air attack where an overwhelming number of different kinds of missiles, drones, the new fast Shaheeds or whatever it would be, combined with huge amounts of other munitions being fired at you, we think at the moment that could potentially overwhelm the capacity of a human operator to be able to decide. So there's a danger that our human decision making can be overwhelmed by the mass that we're seeing emerging. If you were to then start allowing machines to make decisions about which targets to hit and which munitions to use to hit those, that has massive potential for extra efficiency and making sure you're not overwhelmed. But if you turn that round and put it into the offensive domain, where machines are then selecting targets and deciding for munitions, we have to have very clear oversight about that. So again, it's about taking that seriously while not kneecapping ourselves in terms of the fight that we're actually facing.
Now, zoning in, if we can, on Ukraine and Russia. I mean, Russia is putting a huge amount of its national wealth into defence at the moment, so they've got the capacity. But a lot of the issues you've described there are born of ideas and by the mixing of different companies and different people from different nations and the inherent strength of an alliance. Yeah. So is Russia able to bring all these different ideas to the table and make sense of them and turn it into a military capability better than Ukraine / the West?
Well, I mean, I think you're dead right. What we're not doing is actually using those inherent strengths of our democracies, which are the creativity of people, innovation, challenge in the system that we have, where you can challenge rather than the more autocratic system of Russia. But that is a strength of ours, we're just not using it. It's a muscle we're not really exercising properly, and we're not developing into a true competitive advantage. So where Russia is able to draw some advantage is, once they hit on a good idea, it's centralized system, so they can then scale it pretty effectively and quickly. And they do tend to use these things quite systematically. And in some ways, because they've been so methodical with that, plodding, one might say at times, but they've been able to consistently develop it into a strength. Conversely, we've seen the Ukrainians with highly decentralized decision-making, with a proliferation of different ideas, and so perhaps more tactical level innovation or individual innovation, but it's not been able to be scaled or put into that kind of consistent doctrine and warfighting ability that would make the decisive break.
And is that because Ukraine is trying to, with his left hand, fend off this Russian soldier, and with his right hand, put on some boxing gloves and tie up his shoelaces at the same time. So it's just just capacity issue. But why 3.5 years into this thing, external supporters of Ukraine, why haven't they worked through this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would agree with your point very much that Ukraine's being forced to do a hell of a lot with still what is quite a weak hand, and is doing the very best it can and making all sorts of virtues out of the very many necessities it faces. But we again in the West and Western Europe haven't leveraged our strength. We haven't scaled the speed that we've been able to find at some times when supplying Ukraine. So both the UK and Germany, two big players in European defence and the European economy, have, for particular programs for Ukraine, been very fast about procuring particular things and delivering them. But that hasn't been generalised across their whole procurement process, nor their support to Ukraine more generally. I mean, I think you and I would probably agree that the level of commitment to Ukraine's victory hasn't been decisive enough to actually deliver then the political will to drive through those processes at scale. But when we're not even doing it for ourselves as well, it gets seriously worrying. And sometimes we look at the defence industry and technological base as it is, and it's still set up for the old speed. It's still set up for long time scales. We heard Francois Heisburg here say it'd be a strange thing in 1936 to start worrying about the supersonic bomber you want to deliver in 1956 when you've got the war coming in the middle and it's not going to be ready for that. And unfortunately, I think that's still where too much of our process and our thinking and our approach is. So this is why we say at Helsing, and others say this too, is that we need this disruptive approach that actually starts to move at the speed of battlefield change and moves at the speed of geopolitical change that we're seeing, to use those strengths in innovation that we actually have.
But again, that's technology arguably running ahead of the military thought process. Or am I being unfair to the militaries? Is in the exercises that you see more of than me, are these procedures being changed? Are these organisations being changed?
It's a very live question for most militaries in Europe at the moment, and there are different models to this. So some think, for example, uncrewed systems such as drones of particular kinds, or loitering munitions, one-way long-range effectors, should be separated. Others think they should be integrated into artillery battalions or into mortar companies. So if you had 3 mortar squads, then you would switch out one of those for a drone section or a loitering munitions section. The thing is, we don't really know until we try it, and this was also the history of armoured development in all of the armed forces, be that the Allied or Axis powers in World War II. You asked if technology is running ahead of military practice. Well, yeah, it is, because as of yet, most militaries in Europe do not have this new technology in their hands at the scale they need to experiment with it, and to do the kind of work that was done in the 20s on armoured warfare, for example, to truly exploit its potential. And so if we actually want innovation to play to our strength in Europe, we have to get it out of the innovation corner. We have to stop treating it as innovation and treat it as defence technology that needs to be tested like any other. And that means actually procuring it at scale so that our militaries can play with it. That's going to be key to our future. And I think another part of this that we've been hearing a lot here about is sovereign capability. How does this relate to the Transatlantic Alliance and so on? Any strong partnership needs strong partners, and I think the consensus around here in Prague has been that Europe needs to get stronger, not only in its capabilities but also in its defence industry. And again, to do that, you actually need to buy things from that industry so that it can sustain the kind of production and innovation cycles that we're going to need. So I think that's a task that is a matter of almost grand strategy at the national level and at the European level, which we need to set ourselves to.
Are you feeling confident? I heard a lot here in the last couple of days about demand signals from government, and I've heard from industry, demand signals are great, but they don't pay the bills. I need contracts, not demand signals. I mean, are you confident that NATO, the EU, are getting this and are leaning in?
Well, I mean, one of the first things we learned back in GCSE economics was there's a difference between demand and effective demand backed up by money. And so demand signals may indeed be there, but we're not, it's not a hopeless picture, but we're not seeing the scale of commitment to bringing these new technologies in that would disrupt the defence industry, bring in more competition, get those faster scales of iteration going. But there have been some highlights. So the Czech the Chief of Defence, General Karel Řehka, was very clear about saying, look, we need our deeds to match our words. We have to have capabilities to underpin our deterrence. And he was very clear that artificial intelligence and newer defence technologies are a huge part of that. But for him to be able to deliver there, the politicians, the officials in the Ministry of Defence and elsewhere, who I know here are working very hard on that, have to have the political support, the money to back that up, and they have to explain to their society why we're doing this, because ultimately taxpayers who are paying for this rightly will ask, what's in it for me? Well, what's in it for you is multifold. It is, you secure your democracy against threat, and you might say democracy is not everything, but without democracy you're not going to get very far in terms of a free society, and people here really understand that. Second thing is economic growth. Innovative defence technologies can be a key driver of economic growth. We see a Kiel Institute study that says if you put your defence spending into old tech, you get a multiplier of about 0.6 on that. So if you spend 100 billion, you get 60 billion boost in your economy. With the new tech, it's about 1.5, so you get a 150 billion boost in your economy. And the fact that a lot of this is being resourced to Europe and bringing European talent back to work on that is again part of our sovereign development going forward. So I think there's numerous benefits to that have to be explained in order to generate and sustain the political will that you need to then give General Drecker and his troops the support they need and to actually have those capabilities to underpin our deterrence.
Now, you may just have answered my last question.
Sorry, jumping ahead.
No, it's fine. So we're coming to the end of the Prague Defence Summit here, run by the International Institute for Strategic Studies. What have you been most impressed with that you've heard over the last 3 days, and what have you been least impressed with?
So least impressed with is easy to answer. If I'm there speculate, you may have a similar view on this. Is hearing again similar things that we've heard for a couple of years now about the need to get serious. And talking about the need to get serious now without getting serious is frankly becoming incredible. So that's been disappointing to hear more of the talk that's not backed up by action, but certainly that's not the uniform picture. And as I was saying, not only General Drecker, but also we heard from the Czech National Security Advisor Tomáš Pojar, we've heard from Jan Lipavsky, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the kind of strident words that are being backed up by action. And that's increasingly a picture that you see in Germany as well. And we've heard German representatives here talking either in closed-door sessions or on the stage about the speed and seriousness of their transformation. Same from UK representatives. And the bigger countries in Europe, as well as pioneering players like the Czech Republic, are, I think, generally pushing forward. But that only really highlights the gap between those who are still just talking and those who are actually doing. And Europe seriously needs to get into the doing game.
Ben Tallis, thanks so much for talking to Ukraine the latest.
Dom, great to be with you, and love to Francis and the gang.
Yeah, okay, yeah, and him. Now,
Dom, do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Thanks, Adélie. So I've been talking about Tomahawks recently, the context being the possible transfer, gifting of Tomahawk cruise missiles by the US to Ukraine. President Zelensky, speaking yesterday, said, right now it is important to send a signal that Ukraine will be strengthened by all means possible. And this is one of those means that's important to me, Tomahawks. All such things can strengthen Ukraine and force the Russians to sober up a little. Looking at you, Medvedev. And sit down at the negotiating table. Anyway, I raise that because that's a little bit of news on Tomahawks, but also yesterday I got myself into a bit of a flat spin about the US Navy vessels, the 15 ships that are being decommissioned. I didn't know how to pronounce them. So thank you to everyone that wrote in. Thanks to Colleen. Pronounced Ticonderoga, which I didn't know. You probably knew that. I didn't know that. Sorry about that. A town in New York where there was a historical fort active in the colonial days, I now discover. Famous for the Ticonderoga pencils. So if you used to bubble in the testing sheets in school using a Ticonderoga pencil, then please let me know.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine, the latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and in those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest newsletter. Each week, Dom Nicholls and Francis Durnley answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights. Plus, maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the description to this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each day on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.